Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to all of you. So my name is Dr. Rizal. I'm currently working in UNIMAP, and I'm also currently the president of the Malaysian Society for Automatic Control Engineers, or MACE. So this activity, this morning's talk is part of our weekly MACE tech talk, and I hope you will gain something from listening from my sharing this morning. So this morning I will be talking about the topic of managing pressure for peak performance in post-pandemic era. So this week we have basically entered into our 9th week of the movement control order, or the conditional movement control order, until early June, and this basically have forced us to re-evaluate our plan, our strategy, and how we are trying to cope and to get back the normal rhythm of working and the normal cycle of life that we have been that they have changed basically since 18th of March. So of course, this movement control order means that we have been constrained, or our movement are limited in terms of our physical movement. We're not supposed to go far away from our home where we are staying, and I think for most of us, we have been staying at home for the past 8-9 weeks, and nonetheless, all our responsibility have been done, have been executed, have been delivered via the digital mode, online, etc. And of course, in this situation, there are certain pressure, stress that we face, and of course, it's different when you are able to deliver your task face to face, physically being there, delivering, executing your task and responsibility, as opposed to being at home and still expected to deliver to the best of your ability whatever task being given to you, to us. So of course, as an academic in a public university, I myself and many of my colleagues, and I'm sure those who are in the industry or even students, you are trying to juggle this pressure and stress of or expectation from others, and with the constraint that we are having. So this morning, I hope to share with you some of my take on things that probably we can do in order to mitigate the effect of the stress and pressure that we are facing, and to ensure that we are not prevented, we are not limiting ourselves in terms of from getting or achieving whatever target or goals that we have set before this. I think let us now explore further on the issue of the managing pressure. So basically, coming from the control perspective, I think those control engineers will be very familiar with the general control block, the general control closed loop system. So we have the desired output, and you have the plant, which is us, we are the plant, of course, and then we have, so based on the desired input, we behave and we get the output, and from the output, what we normally will do is that we will basically evaluate, reflect on the output and see whether it has achieved the desired level or the desired outcome that we have hoped for, we hoped for before. So, and from then, this sensing or this reflect, this observation on the current output that we have will be an input in order to modify our behavior. So in the control perspective, we say this is the controller, so we change the parameter of the controller so that the controller will now feedback to us our brain become the controller, and we readjust our behavior in order for us to ensure that the E or the error of the output from the actual output and the desired output will converge to zero, because that means we achieve our desired output or desired goals or outcome. So this, as a control engineer, this is we are used to this, we are used to this block closed loop system, and this reflect life, because of course this closed loop control block was extracted from life, and this also, so naturally that reflect how we did our daily life. That means in whatever we do, we have certain expectation, we have certain goals that we had hoped for, and we try to implement it as best as possible, and then we got certain outcome, and from the outcome we observe, we measure back to the original goal and see whether it is similar, or whether we are really diverged away from the expected outcome. So this basically this ability to evaluate and is important, is embedded in us, is embedded. Even as a child, they will know whether they want something, and they will cry if they do not get that something, because that crying is an indication that they realize that they did not get what they want. So basically this is life. I mean, this is life. And where does the pressure comes from? The pressure comes from when we have put all the efforts, and yet we did not get what we want. So that, of course, we do not cry. Well, some of us cry to a certain extent, but that means the pressure came because we have other things. We have expectations from our surrounding, from our colleagues, from our university, from our family, from our loved ones, that we should have achieved some level of goals, or some level of achievement in whatever we have been targeting for. So this closed loop control reflects life. And then when we face certain situation, as a human being, there are psychologists who are saying that we normally respond in 4 ways. First, either we fight when we have something, we really fight assertively, we exert ourselves and we fight, we try to overcome the challenge, or we defend. That means we are being calm, and we calmly respond rather than responding without thinking. We calmly consider our alternative and respond accordingly. Or we freeze. We do not know what to do, and we just let it be, and we stop reacting. Or the fourth one is we just run away. We take a flight, and we just decide to stop facing up to the challenge, and of course basically letting go of whatever dreams and goals that we have. So basically this flight or fight response is typical in all of us. And when we reflect that back at the closed loop system, it is us. That means as a control engineer, we know that there are disturbances, and we know that our plant, which is us, we are not static. We are very dynamic. We have emotion. We have physical aspect of us, the spiritual aspect of us, the cognitive aspect of us. Which are not staying put. It is not static. It is very dynamic. In fact, as they say, the only constant is life. Life is change. So when we look at ourselves and we look at how we respond, it's very, as a control engineer, I think this is something which we are used to. So now, but the only difference, we are now the plant, the control plant, not our robots or not our engines, etc. So we need to be able to handle this non-linear plant using non-linear control approaches, so that we can still achieve our goals or the desired outcome that we have set right from the beginning. And of course, when we talk about desired outcome or desired goals, there are goals which are basically simple, straightforward goals which are achievable to most people. There are goals which are within reach. There are goals which is ambitious, and there are goals which are what we call fantasy level goals, which are basically it's not possible. So what we are aiming is goals which are of course short term, long term, but which can be logically retraced to and reflected in actions that we can take year in year out in order to achieve our goals. So basically, I just want to highlight the point that as a control engineer, we are used to this control block system. We are used to in order to produce the best controller, we must model our plant as best as possible. That means we must understand ourselves well, know ourselves, then we can know how to control it. We know our physical limitation, we know our mental cognitive limitation, we know our spiritual constraint in terms of our commitment, our perseverance, etc. Once we realize, we know that, then we are able to produce the best controller, and in order to anticipate possible disturbances, possible issues that may arise in whatever we will face in our life. So basically, that basically wraps up what I'm trying to basically generalize from the control perspective, what kind of pressures that can happen in our life, and how can we handle it. In order to explore further this topic, I think we need to understand the coping mechanism. How do we cope with pressure? So of course, there are sources of pressure, and this pressure performance, there are what we call the pressure performance stages. That means there are level of pressure on the horizontal axis, and there are performance. That means if the pressure are too small, it leads to boredom. That means we do not really do anything, because the pressure is too low. There's no pressure, there's no push for us to do anything. If the pressure is a bit higher, that we are basically that means in order to deliver certain responsibilities, in order to complete certain tasks, there need to be some pressure. So normally people are deadlines are given, because that will basically set a certain level of pressure. Sometimes on top of the deadlines, you are given certain caution or reminder, something that will happen if you do not deliver. For example, I remember when during my study days, I remember one of the reminder that I got is that if I do not pass, or if I do not graduate successfully from my PhD study, for example, I need to pay every single cent that the sponsor have spent on me. So that is a very strong reminder or caution or level of pressure for me to complete, for example. Of course, there are other expectations from family, etc., that push us forward. So there are certain level of pressure that we need in order to deliver. But if we are basically pushed too high, if the level of pressure are too high, we may, for example, start to feel the strain, because as a normal human being, we start to feel that there is not enough time, we can't do it, we will fail. For example, the prospect of failure is glaring in our eyes, in front of us. So we start to panic, and so this panic state is when we realize that when there is a very high possibility that we will not deliver. So this is a very high level of pressure. So within from this low level of pressure into this high level of pressure, maximum level of pressure, if you want to say it, that produced from boredom, that means it doesn't move us at all, until that it also do not move us. It frees us because we are panicking. When we panic, we can't think well, we can't deliver well, because we are that will be there will a panic state will be obvious physically. That means you can see that somebody is panicking and he is not himself or herself. So this coping mechanism is a balance between the sources of pressure, and how of course it is balanced on our personality, how who we are, and how our knowledge or our personality traits in order for us to cope with this pressure. So it's like it's a balance between the sources of pressure and the effects of the pressure. It can either be positive or it can be very negative. So that means we need to have a relook at the coping mechanism. So when we think of the example of the closed loop system that I've mentioned earlier, so how do we cope with different observation, different the parameters that affect our thing that we are trying to control have changed. Now a new parameter are there. For example, I remember let's say we have a student, we have a postgraduate student who are excellent, been helping us well with our research, and to some extent our research will quietly dependent on this group of students, but suddenly they have to stop collaborating or working with us, and somehow the students are not there anymore, and yet our research are ongoing, and we have this tremendous pressure because now the parameters have changed. We have no students at all. Now what do we do? So this needs a different kind of reaction, or different kind of action, in order to ensure that at the end of the day we will achieve the goals that we have set for. So this coping mechanism is an element which is critical. So we have to have a relook at this coping mechanism vis-a-vis the pressure that we are facing in life, so that the pressure that we face in life is something which is not going to be which is not going to become an obstacle. Rather, they will become the catalyst for us to move further. So I've mentioned earlier the issue of the level of performance. The level of performance will basically also relate heavily to the goals that we have set in our work. That means there are what are the target zone? What are the target zone that we have put there in front of us? There are different kind of target zone. There are, of course, now I think before the pandemic, before the COVID-19 pandemic, before our life changes, we have set certain goals. Of course, from the academic perspective, goals for our family, our personal life. Personally, as an individual, we set certain targets, certain goals. Now things have changed. The situation has changed. There is a need to re-evaluate our goals, our target zone. What are the targets and goals that we have set? So now, when we evaluate and we rewrite the target or readjust the target or the goals, we need to be able to ensure that there are certain goals which are probable goals. There are goals which is possible goals, but there are goals which are what we call a fantasy level goals, which is really out of the world. So we need to be able, because the higher the goal, the higher the pressure, the higher the more things, or the more sacrifice that we need to do, the more efforts that we need to give in order to achieve the high goals. As they say, no pain, no gain. That means like for example, in the investment world, I mean, higher returns mean higher risk. I mean, if you want the minimum risk as possible, then you get the minimum return as possible. That means this is life. That means there's no free lunch. That means if we want big goals, we are aiming high. That means we must be willing to put the efforts to do the hard work in order to achieve that. So this, coupled with the coping mechanism and coupled with our understanding of what are expected, will basically make or break us. That means if we, for example, as an academic, if I know basically my capability in terms of producing papers, publication, for example, I've been maybe like, not about me, but in general, let's say there is you have been publishing, let's say, 2 Q1 index journal paper yearly, year in year out, 2 paper, and suddenly the department or the faculty give you a new target that you need to produce 10 Q1 journal paper. So surely we can't be doing what we've been doing and produce 2 paper, and yet we have a goal of 10 paper, Q1 paper. That means there must be some major changes to our strategy and what we do in our research and publication domain in order to produce that. That means new targets changes the activities that we are doing, and new targets, the higher the target, the bigger the goals, it will produce increase the level of pressure and of course stress to us, because what more, for example, with the pandemic situation and the post-pandemic situation nowadays, people are extrapolating in terms of unemployment will increase, in terms of people needs to find new ways of getting income. That means graduates probably have higher difficulty to get jobs, so the economy is going into recession, not just the local, the global economy. So the playing field were not level before, it will be more uneven after this. That means, so how do we cope? So, and yet we have not readjust our goals, we have not readjust our targets. So this will certainly produce certain level of pressure and added stress to us. So if I recap back, so that means pressure are directly related to the targets and the expectation that we have in our life, and the sense of the ability or our inability in our mind that for us, whether we are able or unable to achieve that particular targets or goal. So this is important. That means for us to reevaluate our coping mechanism. Are we able to cope? So this re-evaluation is critical, because then we are not banking on certain assumption, whereas that assumption is no longer valid. So I think for control engineers, we have always refer or make certain assumptions in order for us to take certain control actions, but we always have to recheck our assumptions, and that mirrors life. That means in life we make certain strategy, we do take certain action because we assume certain things are static, certain things are true. But now with the pandemic and with the probably most likely in the post-pandemic era, things have changed. The rules of the game have changed, and yet that means there is a need for us to re-evaluate our goals and target. Basically, maybe to modify the timeline, for example, modify in terms of our strategy, because this conscious effort to to reevaluate and to readjust our target will basically directly affect the pressure that we are facing today. Now I would like to share some idea and some tips on how we can ensure that we will be able to manage the pressure that we are facing, and also at the same time ensuring as much as possible we are producing the best performance. First is basically to make a choice. I think we must make a choice in terms of the targets that the goals that we want to achieve, and the short term and this long term. I think we must ensure that the target is basically something which will directly impact us, which is basically will be meaningful if achieved, and basically will be of benefits to many if we achieve. That means this is the choice that, and we must make the choice. It shouldn't be something that being forced to us by others, but something which we have decided on our own. So making a choice or making a decision is important in terms of the goals that we are aiming for. That's the first thing. Second is for us to believe in success. I think we must always have this belief that we are ready, we are able to achieve a certain level of success in life, and we are not doomed for failures. I think this belief is what we call a feed forward kind of control mechanism. That means it will amplify our belief and it will amplify our efforts, because we believe, we have this belief that of course it's not blind belief. That means we are not like blindly believing that, because based on our observation, regular observation, reflection on what we are facing day in, day out, we modify our strategy. But we always believe that we are made, we are ready, we are going towards certain level of success. For me, this will basically be a very positive way forward, rather than being pessimistic and gloomy about the situation. The third mechanism is basically to always try to look to find always alternative perspective on things. Sometimes when we are asked to migrate to online, 100% online teaching and learning, to some it is they give a very negative response to it. It won't work. Students have no access. I mean, there's no interaction. So they give a lot of excuses. But sometimes we need to force ourselves to look at things differently, because the conscious effort in finding alternative perspective on matters will in the long run help us, because we do not consciously prevent ourselves from looking for better alternatives. So we need to push ourselves as much as possible to always look for find a different perspective on things. I think this conscious ability to seek alternative is critical, even in making decision. We make decision making. We take a lot of decision day in, day out, daily, but sometimes we rush to our decision because making decision will basically allow us to move to other things. But rushing to make a decision without properly assessing, evaluating what all the possible alternative will not be of benefit to us. I mean, we must force ourselves to look differently on things, because I believe that when we look for alternative and different perspective, that will basically alter the decision that we make and how we want to move forward. the fourth things that we can do is to be a very resourceful person. Means sometimes when we are faced with certain pressure or threat, our mind become narrow. We start to block on. We start to be oblivious to other options that we can take. Because we are so much focused on the threat that we are facing, that we cannot think of other things. We cannot think of other things how to cope with the pressure. So this is what I'm saying. I mean, the resourcefulness in terms of the coping mechanism, how the way we respond to things. Remember, I mentioned earlier about the four ways that people respond. Either they fight it, either they fight the threat, or they calmly respond to the threat, or they freeze, or they take a flight, or they run away. So we should be calmly respond. We should be calmly consider the threat, and calmly consider all possible action that we can take in response to the threat, or to the challenge, or to the source of stress. So this resourcefulness is basically will be important in order for us to be able to ensure that the pressure that we face will be the catalyst for us to become nearer to achieve our goal. The fifth thing that we can do is to choose not to worry, or choose when to worry. Choose when to worry. You know, in life there are things which is within our control, and there are things which is outside our control. So even when we do as control engineer, when we develop a controller, we know when we model the situation, we know when we model a situation, that immediately implies that we do not capture everything in the environment, in the environment that we want to control. There are certain things we just ignore. So same thing when we have some issues or some problems, we need to be able to choose to worry and when to worry. Sometimes, for example, the weather. If you worry too much about the weather, it's okay to complain a bit, but there's no point of worrying too much about the weather, because we can't choose the weather. The weather is there. So there are things which is within our control, but for example, there are things within our control with regard to weather. For example, what to wear, maybe we use umbrella, maybe we delay our departure, or something. That means the way we respond is important, but we do not need to be worried about everything, because so this is the fifth thing that we need to be able to decide when to worry and when not to worry. Okay, the sixth thing is basically in order to evaluate the patterns that we have in our life. I think all of us have certain patterns that we follow in order to conduct our daily lives. So, some of these daily patterns are self-limiting in the sense that it basically prevent us to move forward and to achieve bigger goals. Because, for example, we have self-doubt, we have low self-esteem, we believe that we are not meant to get certain goals, etc. So that means these patterns that we have in life, or our daily response to whatever life throws at us, need to be re-evaluated and needs to be corrected if it needs to be, so that ensure that those self-limiting beliefs do not limit our performance, do not prevent us from getting what we deserve. So of course, and finally, of course, as a human being, we have our physical being, we have the spiritual being component, we have the cognitive component, and all these three are working together to respond to to the environment, to life. So of course we need to look after ourselves, we need to look after our spiritual side in terms of our relation to God, in terms of our self-realization of who we are in this big universe, for example. In terms of our cognitive domain, we need to be able to utilize it, we need to feed it with knowledge, useful knowledge, the right knowledge. We need to provide, we need to ensure the balance are there, in terms of, as I said, in terms of our health, in terms of our spiritual situation and component, in terms of our mental health. That means, and this is important, especially in this time of there are many uncertainties, and there are many issues that we are facing. We need to strive to achieve balance. I think I would like to basically conclude my sharing this morning. So if I can recap, I think what the most important thing for us to understand is that pressures are there, source of pressure and source of stress in life are there, will always be there. That's one thing. Secondly, we need to make sure that this pressure and this that we are facing will not become a source of limitation. It's not going to become an obstacle in us achieving our targets. We must be able to harness all this pressure and stress that we have, constraint that we have around us, in order for us to move forward. Thirdly, I mentioned that, of course, the level of pressure that we're facing is directly linked to the kind of goals that we have set for ourselves. Of course, there are goals being set upon us by our organization. For example, in the university setting, there are goals in terms of publication, there are goals in terms of graduate students, there are goals in terms of industry collaboration, consultations, etc. And these are seriously immediately introduce a number of pressure to us with all the constraints, for example, in getting students, in getting grants, research grants, in getting support, general support from our surrounding. And there are goals set by us, by our own personal goal. But if you can align between the academic, from the goals given to us and goals set by us, then everything will be goals that are agreed upon and tailor-made, so that we can now aim for the same or single target or single goal, rather than you have separate entities, separate targets, and that will become multiple sources of pressure. Of course, following from that, I've talked about the coping mechanism. We need to be able to re-evaluate what kind of mechanism that we use in order to cope with the pressure. I think we have the ability, and we always have the ability, the capability and ability to handle the pressure. As a Muslim, in the Quran, Allah said, "La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha." That means God will not burden you something if you cannot handle it. That means there are many verses on the positive, giving a very positive encouragement to us, saying that whatever burden is given to us, we are able to overcome it if we persevere and we take the right actions. Of course, I said, though the situation have changed outside there, I mean our external environment have changed. Of course, in the post-pandemic situation, we're going to face a lot more issues. There's a lot more pressure, source of pressure, stress to us. But as long as we can take it in our stride, and be able to consider whatever pressure, and be able, as I mentioned earlier, to choose when to worry, to take different alternatives, to look at different alternate perspective on the problems, and to be more resourceful in us trying to solve the issues that we're facing, in order to be positive about life, in order to be looking forward to the new opportunities that will present itself in new circumstances. And in academia, I think we have the support, and we must always be ready to collaborate and to cooperate with others. And I believe even though there are some too many of the pressures, we can't control, we can't do anything to prevent it from coming, but at least for those pressures that emanated or generated due to our response towards the external pressure, those are the things that we can control, and we can try to mold it, to control it, so that it will become a positive feedback to us. So in a nutshell, I think from the control perspective, what we are facing is of course disturbances, external disturbances, which we hope can be bounded. We hope that we are able to modify our control mechanism, or what we call a coping mechanism, in order to absorb all the issues, and we are able to move forward. And I think if there is a need to re-evaluate our goals, I think we need to re-evaluate our goals. And there's no point of trying to modify the coping mechanism when everything has changed, and yet we have not re-evaluated the goals. I think the goals need to be re-evaluated, and so that, in order to ensure that it is going to be of benefit to us and to all of us. So I hope you have benefited some bit from what I've spoken about this morning. I'm sorry for this if I have not basically met your expectations. So selamat berpuasa dan selamat menjalani hari-hari akhir bulan Ramadan. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.